That's like the old, we used to do that. Well, thanks, I'll try not to forget your name, but if I do, it takes a while. I'll be 82 next month. I don't remember my I'm like a goal. She says, like, we're more. I'll just enjoy meeting.
I'll say something in front of you. I'll say something in front of you. Why did they not put the picture here and everything? Oh, I'll say it for you. Okay. I have no problem saying it. No problem saying it.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. What an awesome crowd. Thank you guys so much for being here this morning. I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started. If I can get Mr. Donahue. Mr. Emery, will you do the invocation, please?
Be glad to. Thank you. Heavenly Father, we lift you up today, and Lord, we praise your name. We thank you for the opportunity to assemble, Heavenly Father, to come and talk about our country, talk about the things that we need to do. But first of all, for your guidance through prayer. Heavenly Father, we need to come together with ones that are hurting today. We need to ask for healing. We need to ask, Lord, that you take certain people that have lost, that you'll hug them, hold them tight, that you'll keep them, Heavenly Father, understanding that we're here to help each other as needed. We pray for the meeting today, Lord, that you'll use the speaker, and Lord, you'll open his heart, his mouth, to where he'll speak the truth, and he'll speak the things, Heavenly Father, that you desire. All these things we lift you up and praise your name in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. Ron Johnson, will you please do the pledge, sir?
Yes, sir.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
I can make it work.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We have Mr. Derek Somerville with us this morning. Some of you may be familiar with him. He is a political activist, I guess you could say. He has been doing a lot of research regarding the November election, and he has a lot of great information to share today. So if you will give Mr. Derek come on up and get started.
Good, great, thank you. As fate would have it, enlightened. I'm not going to drop some earth-shattering piece of information that's going to rock your world and change your paradigm. There's a lot of voices out there right now talking about a lot of things, and that's really not my goal. What I wanted to do, and what I've been doing, and what I've been invited to do to a number of GOPs, is to start balancing the discussion between what we know happened, what we can prove happened, but what we need to do moving forward to actually win elections as experts about what happened in the state that I'm going to disprove. But it's a balanced conversation, and it's one that hopefully will be interactive. And so to make that happen and to have a good morning, well, there's why it wasn't working. My computer's Stacy, sing for everybody. Well,
It's okay, we'll wait.
We'll wait. Let me talk about my dogs for a minute.
There you go. There he is.
All right. Yes, in fact, that might even mean that this works. Yes, excellent. All right. This is already better. All right, well, you can help, and it's not tonight, it's this morning, so forgive me. This normally doesn't happen in the morning. There's two things that I would ask of you in order to make this a productive discussion. Number one, please interact and ask questions. I do not have all the answers. Importantly, I don't have all the questions, and so every time I speak, somebody asks a question that I had not thought about before. And remember, everything that we do, especially in something as significant as is trying to understand what occurred in our elections, whether it's corruption, whether it's incompetence, is a deductive funnel. You start with very big questions, and you try to bring them down to very narrow answers. So number one, please interact, please ask questions. Number two, this is probably the most important thing that I can ask of everyone. We've got a problem, right? I think everybody knows that. We've got a lot of problems. And I've been thinking about how do we organize our understanding of what is our real problem, right? So I do it this way. I like graphics. I built a quadrant. I said, well, on one axis, voter participation. People that refuse to vote, people that are going to vote no matter what. On the other axis, people that believe in no fraud, which is ridiculous, and people that believe that every single aspect of the election was rigged, which is probably a little extreme as well. But you can imagine that the further you move down the belief in a completely rigged election, the less likely you are to vote. That makes sense. We know that happened. We'll look at that in a second. So that's kind of the direction that people take, right? And let me ask you, where do you think in this chart the Democrats want you? Do they want you up here voting, or do they want you down here? And if they want you down here, what's one of the best ways to keep you down here, right? They want you to believe that the election was completely fraudulent and you should not vote. And why wouldn't they want that? That's the enemy hoping you'll throw your weapon down on the ground because they cheated. There's a saying that says that refusing to vote is not a protest, it's a surrender. And that's really stuck with me. But a lot of people in the state did refuse to vote, right? And what did that do? And we heard it from a lot of people. We heard it from Linwood. We heard it from a lot of people. Don't vote. Show them. You show them. Don't vote. And what did that get us? It got us 2 lost Senate seats and a 284,000 vote swing from in our favor to not our favor. That's what it did. We had a 10% dropout in total Republican votes. They only had a 4%. This strategy of getting people to believe that their vote would be flipped and their vote wouldn't count absolutely assured 2 Senate seats. And I certainly believe that if we had a way back machine and we could jump in it and go way back, we might tell Linwood and others, stop what you're saying. And I'll say this on behalf of the veterans in the room, I didn't go and fight on foreign soil to then watch people stand up and tell people to not exercise one of the most critical democratic rights, right? So, critical rights of democracy, let me say it that way so my words don't get mixed. 284,000 vote swing. And when you went into the counties that were strongest for President Trump, who I passionately support, absolutely. So don't make any mistake here, but the stronger the support for Trump in the precinct, the greater the propensity to not turn out for that Senate seat. We've got to reverse this trend. And we're going to talk about later in this presentation, and I'll try to move quickly. The Democrats are registering people at a phenomenal pace, and they're getting them to the polls. And how did they do it this last time? What was their chief mechanism to get them to the polls? Absentee ballots. We're going to dig into that. This is kind of where I think we mostly are. We've got people that I think most people know that some level of fraud occurred, and they go all the way on the spectrum. That's where I think we are. But I think from a leadership and a strategy perspective as a party, where we probably need to get everybody is up here. Because you can believe that there was election fraud, and you can still vote, and you can still implement strategies to win elections. And I've said this time and time again, if you think it's difficult to investigate election fraud now, try doing it under a Democrat governor, or a Democrat Secretary of State, or a Democrat House, God forbid, or a Democrat State Senate.
We already did.
We're done. We're absolutely done, because look what happens for every effort that we do now. I mean, I'm going to get to it, but I was sued in federal court for just simply trying to vet out answers by Stacey Abrams. So how do we get there? Well, number one is we don't admit defeat. And there's been a little bit of tail dragging, and it's time to stop that and say, wait, we're not going to admit defeat. We have a lot to learn from what happened, and we need to roll those lessons forward into our strategy. And like I said before, we also don't refuse to vote. If we do nothing else, if we learn nothing else from this, we can't have people refuse to fight because the enemy cheated. The enemy always cheats. The way that you match the enemy's cheating is with overwhelming force, overwhelming strategy, and an overwhelming commitment to win. Not sitting there reveling in what happened behind us. And we need to learn from it, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because that needs to inform policy going forward, which in some cases it already has. Senate Bill 202, very good piece of legislation, informed by what happened. But we have more to do. How do we get there? Well, we got to have a desire to win, right? And that comes down to leadership. We have to have leadership within our party that says, above all, we do need to win. We have to win. We have to have a strategy to win, though. A commitment to win is not enough. One of the challenges that we have right now, and it's a strategy of the Democrats, is to divert our attention, divert our resources, sue us, call us names, split our ranks so that we can't coalesce our forces and focus on one thing. They do it very well. We'd be well served to put a strategy together that counters that. Because as a group, as an individual, our ideals are the greatest that have ever existed in all of mankind and governance. Period. They can't be beat. What we believe in and what we're willing to do for them, which sometimes we forget what we're willing to do for them, nobody can top that. But we've got to have a strategy to put all that energy and force back in place. And we need to be committed to, and we're going to get into some details, facts that we know to be true, number one, that we know to be true. Not that we want to be true, not that we believe to be true, but that we know that are true, and that we can act upon. One of the things that I would challenge everybody in the room is you're hearing information still fly out about the election. If it's not something that you can do something with, discard it. Don't put it in your backpack. If we can't act on it, it's meaningless. I have a background in the intelligence community. I think everybody knows I'm a Marine. I served over in Iraq, and I served in Mogadishu in an intelligence capacity. Then I wound up serving with the DIA in Central America. So I have a background in intelligence, and of course the FBI. Information that you have that you can do nothing with is invaluable. It's of no value. It has no value. All I can do is distract you. How do we get there? We're not going to get there by trying to convince everybody that there was no fraud, because that's ridiculous. But if we can agree on that, we're not going to get there by trying to convince everybody that fraud was the only reason that we had issues in 2020, because it was not the only reason we had issues in 2020. Unless you're prepared to state right now that we are perfect in everything that we do, fraud was not the only reason that we had challenges in 2020. But it was a big part, no doubt about it. Here's another thing we need to do. We've got to be able to differentiate between corruption and incompetence. This is critical. They both tend to produce similar outcomes, right? Incompetence and corruption can produce similar outcomes, but you don't go after them the same way. One, you don't vote these people back in or in the first place. And two, you throw those ones in jail, right? And I'm sure you're with me on this one. It would be nice to see somebody go to jail sooner or later. That would be nice. We need to understand the difference between evidence and proof. There is a difference. If you go up to the Pacific Northwest, what happened? If you go up to the Pacific Northwest, you can find 12, 15, 20 people that will sign a sworn affidavit that they have seen Bigfoot. That's evidence of Bigfoot. You drag Bigfoot in this room, that's proof. Okay? So we need to know the difference between evidence and proof. Just because somebody has evidence that something happened doesn't mean it did happen. Let's make sure that that's not a problem. Okay.
That's Stacey Abrams.
You got two too, so he's there is a difference here between being right and doing right. There's going to be occasions, and there have been in your life already, where you were right. But that was different than doing right. Just because you have the answer doesn't mean that that answer necessarily needs to be part of what we're doing. I don't know if, maybe if I unplug this, that'll stop doing And then finally, we need to sort fact from fiction. And this is the hardest one. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to give you some examples, because one of the things that we've been lulled as a society into doing is believing that somebody who speaks passionately, articulately, and with conviction is telling you the truth, right? Not always, though. The greatest con men in history are the ones that actually... Is that bad? Okay. So I'm thinking, what in the world? I'm going to put that but we get lazy. We do. And it's hard to know what to believe, because the mainstream media is discounting things we know to be true, pushing things we know to be false. But we have to be very, very, very cautious. And for those that know me well, they'll tell you, I don't believe anything until I know it to be true. It doesn't matter if it comes from the most trusted person I know. I need to know it's true before I'm going to put, frankly, my name or my energy around it. We have to be very, very discerning about fact versus fiction. So let's talk a little bit about fiction. How many people remember the infamous DOD versus CIA firefight in the Frankfurt warehouse? Right? Anybody remember hearing that? Yeah, it never happened. But people got pretty excited it happened, right? And about the same time, not too long after that, actually, we heard about the Special Forces taking possession of Nancy Pelosi's laptop. How many people heard about that one? Right? I'm going to venture to say, number one, that if we had Nancy Pelosi's laptop, it would be a pretty boring piece of equipment. I don't think Nancy's fingers have ever touched the keys of a keyboard. But a lot of people believe these because they came from one man. Anybody remember who that came from? These two. Came from Lieutenant General McInerney. And when you're talking about a 3-star general making these statements, it's worth listening to. That's a significant ranking official. But what not many people knew is that the Lieutenant General had retired in 1994, 26 years earlier. Anybody here leave a job more than 25 years ago? Anybody have any idea what's going on at that place anymore? Yeah, they don't tell you anymore. And so, with no disrespect to the general, none of this was factual. It wasn't even remotely true. But a lot of people bought into it. And here's part of the problem, is when you go with something that's that radical, all of a sudden something that once seemed radical seems reasonable. Because if we can have a firefight between CIA and DOD personnel, then what can't happen? But these were false. There was no basis of truth around this whatsoever. Well, let me bring up one that was closer to home. This was testimony before our legislature by an out-of-state individual who said 96,600 mail-in ballots that were voted but never actually shown as received back by the county. Now think about what he was saying. He's saying that 96,000, almost 97,000 absentee ballots were voted, but they never showed up, right? So that's a serious charge. And by the way, this is an individual with a Harvard MBA who's got a company out in Texas, who bragged about the 3-letter organizations he's worked with. He's articulate, he's bright, he's well-dressed, and he was passionate about everything he said, and he was wrong. Okay? That statement, that's this gentleman, because everybody's suing everybody now. Now I take names off and I put black dots in front of faces. But you can go and you can watch the testimony yourself. Emery may remember some of this. I was watching it, and as he was making these statements, I have that data on that computer right there. It's right there. Which I hope I have some Second Amendment friends here, because if anybody comes to try to take that computer, won't happen. A couple of things that R said. He said, we found over two. By the way, this is testimony before our legislature. We found over 200,000 mail-in ballots that, when we looked at the voter record, had supposedly never been returned. And that sounds nefarious. Oh my goodness, they've never been returned. And the 96,600 was the exact number. That's very precise language, right? For testimony before a legislative body. 96,600 is the exact number of mail-in ballots that were voted, but were never actually shown as received by the county. Well, I knew that number when he said it. I know that number, actually, because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to detail. And those that have known me for a while, and I know a few of you have, I don't put anything out there until I know it. Well, his statements made it into the Kraken lawsuit, the mighty Kraken, right? It's in the lawsuit. So they made it into federal court. Well, here's the thing. Here's the facts of the matter. And again, I have the file on this laptop right now. It wasn't 200,000 mail-in ballots that were never returned. It was 223,000. This may shock people, but not everybody that requests an absentee ballot ultimately votes it. Did anybody here request a ballot, but ultimately go in and vote in person and surrender that ballot in person? Anybody do that? A few hands. About 20% of the state does that every time. And that issue was actually driven out because our Secretary of State, we're going to talk a little bit about this program, sent out the 6.9 million unrequested absentee ballot forms. So a lot of people requested a ballot that didn't even entirely understand they were requesting a ballot, didn't really want it, and they did it back in April and May, and they got more comfortable with voting in person, so they surrendered it. Okay? So here's the deal. Here's what they said. 96,000, this is why they said it, I believe. This is the actual voter file. These ballots have a status of C. C does not mean counted, as they said. It means canceled. There happen to be just about 96,600 canceled ballots. These individuals from out of the state came in on Giuliani's team, and I've always been a fan of Giuliani, but I don't think this was one of his brightest moments. And with authority and using the Harvard tag and listing 3 letters, tried to tell us that we had almost 100,000 ballots that were voted but never turned in. They were canceled. And I can tell you exactly how they were canceled, where they were canceled, who canceled them, and why. Because that's all recorded. And by the way, this data, so this is from the Secretary of State's office. Who do you think that belongs to? It is yours. You better believe it's yours. That's your property right there. Okay, so that never happened. It just never happened. But if you were watching at home and you heard that, why wouldn't you believe this gentleman?
And canceled means that they voted in person and...
There's a number of reasons. So the most prevalent one is that they changed their mind, they voted in person, and they surrendered it. Okay. Some of these ballots wind up getting canceled because they go out and they go into the ether. People move, which we're going to talk about. They get destroyed. There's a number of reasons, which is one of the reasons why we really have to reel in absentee ballots, and we're going to talk about that. But the predominance of this are just Georgians that in April and May, like all of us, we didn't understand COVID at that time, and so why not get that absentee ballot? And we requested a lot of them, 1.7 million to be precise. Yes, ma'am.
So if you didn't request an absentee ballot, but you got one, and you took it in when you voted and turned it back in, what did they do with that absentee ballot?
Well, they'll destroy the ballot, but that's a whole nother problem. If you got one and didn't request it, that's a whole nother bag of worms that maybe we can open it at the end of this.
We threw ours in the trash.
Yeah, and a lot of people just said, yeah, I destroyed it, which is your right to do. And those records are in there. You'll see, well, here's some examples. Ballot was undelivered. So some of these ballots go to an address and there's nobody there anymore. And some of these get surrendered in person and some of them are destroyed by the voter. Okay? But the point of this is, it didn't happen. And we were told it did happen. In fact, we weren't told, our representatives were told it happened. So what I tried to do when I was looking at what was going on with the election was, well, let's get the facts. And I like numbers and I like data, because typically speaking, you can create an audit trail. And you're looking for anomalies. When you look at this, so all I have here is the previous presidential election with that one lady, what was her name? That deplorable...
The witch?
Yeah, it'll come to me, so basically, we're just looking at the prior election versus this one. There's no fantastic statistical analysis here. We're starting with a very big deduction fund, right? Very big. And, well, what stands out here? I mean, obviously, those two things stand out. Well, number one is, how did our registered voters increase by 1.8 million in a 4-year period? Has anybody had that question posed to them up until just now? How did we add 1.8 million people to our voter rolls?
Racism.
In a 4 period. Well, most certainly. Yeah. No, and that's, and I appreciate the tone in which that's offered up, because the greatest registration gains have taken place in Hispanic and African American communities, but not 1.8 million. So this is a number that we ought to be curious about, because that voter roll, that voter file, that is, I would argue, one of the most important pieces, one of the most important possessions in this state, because your core voting, everything we do, I guess, from a democracy perspective, funnels through that file. That file needs to be maintained, it needs to be pristine, but somehow it grew by 1.8 million. So we'd want to dig into that a little bit. Yes, ma'am?
Did you ever look at how we were able to get Stacey Abrams 600,000 more voters?
Oh, we're gonna talk about that, yeah.
Between
Yeah.
August and November?
Yeah.
Come on.
We're gonna talk about
Go and try and get that many.
Yep. Well, so this is a number we need to understand, and this is how we should look at these things. What stands out? What's unusual? Because we did not have a population growth of 1.8 million over a 4-year period. That's not what happens here. That's probably 8 to 9 times the growth of voting aged individuals in our state. And there's a number of ways that can happen, and we'll talk about that. But of course, our absentee ballots. This is important because we keep looking at 2020 and making arguments that are based on elections. 2020 was not an election like we've ever had, ever. Right? In 2016, we had about 200,000 absentee ballots, and in 2020, we had over almost 1.4 million vote on them, with 1.7 million requested. Well, the problem with this is that, and I always say, absentee voting is the playground of the corrupt. That's where you do it. And the metaphor I always use is if you're driving down the street and you decide today's the day you're going to litter, are you going to throw your trash in the perfectly clean yard or the one with all the garbage in it? You throw it all in the one with the garbage in it because no one's going to know which garbage is yours. And that's absentee voting.
How did they verify if that person was dead, alive? Did they have to submit a social security number? Was it based on the 2010 census?
Yeah. So there's a couple of, well, let's pause and talk about this for a little bit. That's okay. No, it's a good question. Because your voter rolls don't swell just because you register more people. Your voter rolls also swell because you didn't remove the ones that should be removed under law, right? So it's an attic, and you keep putting stuff in there, but if you're not taking anything out, it starts to get really, really messy. Our secretary, this might shock some of you, but our Secretary of State's office may not have done the best job managing the data.
You think?
I'm not trying to be controversial here. That's a large part of what happened. There was so much garbage in there, which permitted people to vote that weren't necessarily registered to vote. It's a real problem, and we're going to dig into that in a minute. So, but absentee, we really need to be thinking about this because there's a number of things that occurred with absentee ballots that I think we're going to slowly find is going to be the largest thrust of fraud in the state. Are you raising your hand, or? Oh, okay. Let me ask another quick question because Stacy brought this up to me yesterday, and if any of you follow me, you know I've been asking this question the last week. Where do you think, and I know you know that this is a loaded question, but answer it as if you didn't think it was a loaded question. Where do you think your absentee ballot was printed and mailed from? Where do you? No. You know, Gordon County did the same thing. I'm like, you know,
Arizona.
Would it be reasonable to think it happened in this state?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe even by your county. But I heard somebody in the back get it right. Well over 1.5 million of your ballots were printed, inserted, and mailed from Maricopa County, Arizona. You can't make it up, right? You just can't make it up. Now, I'm not saying that.
Is that proof?
Yeah, that's proof. Yeah, that's not evidence. That's proof. And what's also proof is that that's a family-owned business, and the wife of that CEO and owner of that business and his son, who's the customer service manager and production manager, made 95 separate donations to Biden for president, for Stop Republican PAC, for Investigate Trump, Planned Parenthood, right down the line, Turn Progressive Voter Out PAC. Now again, that's not necessarily proof of fraud, but what it is proof of perhaps is incompetence by a Secretary of State that outsourced it across the country to an organization that has obvious political biases. And I personally know people in the state that could have printed those ballots. So we have questions, and we should get those answered. But I didn't know that, and I don't know that many people probably did know that. I assumed, and I don't know if we have any elections board people here, that those would have been printed locally, out of the county, and sent by the county. And it's going to create another problem, because we're going to talk about change of address. And what happens when an Arizona company prints your absentee ballot, or prints one for somebody who moved, and they mail it from Arizona, Who finds out that that person's moved? We have no idea. We have no insight whatsoever. Let me ask you another question. If you're the one printing those ballots, what keeps you from printing 1,000 and putting them on the back dock? And somebody just picks them up and drives them up. Now, I'm not saying any of this happened. What I am saying is these are questions that we should at least be made to understand whether or not this level of diligence was taken by the Secretary of State's office, and that the quality controls were in place to make sure that only the ballots that were requested were printed. And what happened to the ones that came
To
back?
that point, chain of custody.
Yeah, chain of custody, absolutely. Because I will tell you, in my opinion, what we're going to learn is the combination of all of these absentee ballots flying everywhere, and the drop boxes downtown are going to be one of your primary issues of fraud. I can almost assure you, as if maybe I know something, that you're going to learn that there were individuals stuffing those boxes in multiple states. Yes, sir.
Who chose that particular outfit in Arizona to print those ballots? Who was the decision maker, or how was it done?
So the question is, who made the decision to use that group, who only became a qualified vendor in Georgia in April, by the way. So it was an emergency procurement. And if you go out and you read, there's one individual who proudly made a press release to say that he is using them, and that would be your current Secretary of State, Mr. Raffensperger.
Oh, that's surprising.
It is pretty surprising.
Earlier you said that the votership went down 6% for GOP?
They went, well, no, the turnout for the Senate runoff dropped 10%.
Oh, 10%.
Where the Dems dropped 4%, which is why we lost those 2 seats.
Okay, and I'm just kind of trying to reference, if we're fighting 500% voter possible fraud,
Yeah.
and 10%, it just, to
Those
me, it
are,
seems
I would
like-
argue those are unrelated, but
Okay.
you're on the right track, and we're
Yeah,
gonna come back to that.
I'm just wondering if the voter turnout is as low as y'all think on the GOP side, if we're trying to fight.
Yeah, I would bet everything I own that those numbers are accurate. Everything I own. Yes, sir.
Actually, you register your car, your checkbook has a number on it, the juror number. Why don't we register the absentee ballot with the numbers so we can track it?
Did everybody hear that question?
Yeah.
Well, you're speaking reasonably, sir, and we don't do that. All right, we got some material to move forward, so.
Yeah, our governor must have known that. Our governor knew that the Secretary of State, they must have known that. He must have known the investigation. He must have known that that company in Maricopa County was a Biden company. He must have known.
Well, I don't know yet, because I don't know if anybody did their due diligence, or, you know what, here's a problem. So one thing we have to remember is, this is unprecedented time. So
COVID.
in hindsight, it's really easy to pick this apart. And so I want to be measured and say this. When people panic, they do silly things, right? They do it in business, they do it in real life, they do it on the battlefield, they do it in this. I don't know if they did the diligence. Here's what I would want, is I would want a Secretary of State who has a team so competent that they would do that diligence, because it took me 30 minutes on an afternoon. So could they at least minimally said, okay, we did know about it, but they made us feel comfortable anyways. At least we would know they knew about it. We don't even know if they knew about it. And by the way, we don't know that influenced what that company did. But what I want from an organization who makes I said this to somebody the other day, and I'll get going. If you produce footballs for every team in the NFL, you probably don't want to donate all your money to one of them. Because I would think the other team would say, not for nothing, but am I getting the same football as the other team? Let's move on. So more numbers. The registration drive, and I just want to talk about this because you have to consider this in terms of the what occurred in the election. Significant increase, but about the same percentage between counties that went Biden versus counties that went for Trump. About the same. The difference is that the basis was larger, right? So they were starting with 3.9 million versus our 3.2. And what you can see, and this is the real conundrum that we have, and we're not going to solve this without a good strategy, is 6 of those counties were responsible for 700,000 of those registrations. They have something in those inner city areas that we do not have in our rural areas. What is that? They have population density. They can hit 10 doors in 20 feet. We have to go 5 miles. So that means that we either outthink it or we outwork it, but we have to probably do both, because that's a reality. And if you think, and this is my personal opinion, I don't think we're gonna go down into the inner 6 counties and change those dynamics. I don't think that's gonna happen. And it's unfortunate because we have the most welcoming party in the state. But it's a very difficult thing to penetrate right now, and probably not our best effort. And Biden won 70% of the 1.9 million votes that were cast in those 6 counties. So you have to pay attention to this. Like some of these counties, they're big, they're huge, they're massive. And they represented 40% of all voters to begin with. And so that's what we're dealing with. That's why we have to activate these other counties. I mean, we have 159 counties, and 6 of them are starting to determine what's going on in this entire state. And we're losing sight of this, by the way, and we need a strategy for it. And we're fortunate because we have a member of our legislature here that's soaking this up, and this is the conversation that needs to occur. Fact-based. I'm going to blow through, I think, some of this because I don't need to go through those counties one by one. But some of the questions that we've already talked about that I've been asking is, well, number one, how did we grow by 1.3 million? Well, because of registration harvesting absolutely happens. Absolutely happens. I had a school teacher from Cobb County in the Gordon County event the other night, which was amazing that she drove up from Cobb County. And she says that they will come into the school and they will register these 17-and-a-half-year-olds that have no political opinion or affiliation whatsoever. They're unengaged, uninformed, and they're basically peer pressured into filling out these registrations. And guess what? When that ballot shows back up, those individuals show up again too. But how many people remember, I know I do, how many people remember as about 2 years, well, first off, after the governor's election, but right around 2018, we learned that there were 17 to 20,000, somewhere around there, applications, registration applications from a group called, what was her group? New Georgia Project by our friend Stacey Abrams. And those 17,000 people could not recall the last 4 digits of their social security number properly. They couldn't do it. Not the whole thing, just the last 4. Or some of them got their birthday wrong. A lot of them got their addresses wrong. Some of them had addresses that weren't even physical structures. And yet nobody did anything. Nobody went to jail. Nobody. Best I tell. So we know that there's something going on there, right? Where did those registrations occur? How did they occur? Was it a lack of file maintenance? These are all questions that our Secretary of State's office should answer. And incidentally, looking forward, candidates for that office should answer too, right? Because this is a job that requires competency. Rhetoric is not good enough. I get asked about this quite a bit now, about who I would support, and I don't generally answer it, but I do say this. Imagine if you had to elect the pilot of your flight every time. Would you go with the nice guy that somebody likes and he's friendly, or would you go with the one that's actually flown an airplane before, knows how to get it? Maybe he's been where you want to go, right? Give that some thought. I gotta get moving. But here's the thing that really caught my eye. Look at the disproportionate level of absentee for Biden versus Trump. Trump had a 339% increase over his last run in 2016. The cognitively impaired one had a 763% increase over that deplorable woman. So what accounts for that difference? That's a massive difference, right? They garnered 850,000 absentee ballots. We did 451. Well, I gotta be honest with you. I tend to look internal first. I look at myself, my own organizations. I don't go to an external explanation for everything because then we never improve. I don't know about you, but I got 6 or 7, in addition to the one that our friend Brad sent, 6 or 7 absentee ballot request forms sent to me. Every single one of them came from a Democrat organization. I never got one from a Republican organization. I never heard one Republican tell me, don't worry, you don't even need to go to the polls. Just vote absentee. Nobody ever told me that. Right? That's not what we were saying. To be honest, we were kind of saying, hey, if you really want to make sure your vote counts, go down and vote in person. And that was probably a miss. That's not what was happening here. They won this election with absentee ballots. And absentee ballots is the playground of the corrupt. Yes, sir.
Derek, one other thing that everybody needs to hear also, the Atlanta Falcons and the Atlanta Hawks, they had a bus that went around to neighborhoods that would say, come shoot around with your favorite Hawk basketball player. Come throw the ball with your favorite Falcon, Arthur Blank and the professional teams that reached out. They went and had these people signed up, took them to vote, they feed them, they do all the things. These numbers add up. There's something else you're not gonna like, but I'm gonna tell you too. They outworked us on the ground. We were lazy, like it or not. And when I say that, you have to think about, you have to step up to help the candidates you want to win. That means you don't sit back and complain, you get out and work. I put up 300 signs myself, have 2 or 3 people that helped me. I went around the night, I think I called Teresa, and there was no Trump signs up. And there was a bunch of, at the precincts, there were a bunch of Democrat signs everywhere. And I was watching also 1 or 2 that was coming in moving signs. Now, what I have to do is 2 things. Contact our law enforcement, let them know an area to watch, and they try to do that. So, you know, when you see something, say something, but always remember, the one who works the hardest will win also. And the absentee, they outworked us on basically that too, and that was the part we should have.
Well, and think what that, I'll get right to you, ma'am. Think what that empowered. Think about what that process, who it empowered. It empowered an individual that's sitting at home, who, by the way, has every right to vote. Has every right, and I'm as committed to vote to securing the right for a Democrat to vote as a Republican. So let me be perfectly clear about that. We don't get to pick. We're a better party than that. But it absolutely empowered that uninformed, unengaged, apathetic individual who could vote from their couch. And if there's 500 of those in one building, they're going to crush it. And we're either going to go and try to win that building over, which again, good luck if you want to give it a try. Come back, report your progress. Or maybe we need to come up with strategies to counter that. But that's a real dynamic, and it's not going away. I mean, there's some things that we did in 202 that are amazing, that the Senate bill. But there's some things that we did that might have actually permitted this absentee ballot conundrum to continue, like the legalization of those drop boxes, which troubles me because how do you receive your absentee ballot? You get it in the mail. So how come you can't send it in the mail? Well, yes, ma'am.
To his point about not getting out, and it's our fault because there's no organization right now.
Yeah, that's the strategy
There's
part.
just no strategy right now.
Yep.
We've been trying in our precinct to get some training on how to go out, and we're supposed to be able to take a course. We've been trying to get that for 4 or 5 months now. We can't even get the training scheduled.
Well, I'll offer 2 things. One is the right people are in the room to hear what you just said, so that's good. I will also say that a lot of this is easy to say and hard to implement, but we need to get going.
Well, the Democrats are implementing it.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk because and I need to push through here real quick, and then we'll get to questions because they have a strategy, and I'm going to share with you what this process has revealed. Like we said, 400,000 more absentee ballots than Trump. Why is that? And did that hurt us? Of course it did. 65% of all absentee ballots went to Biden. We need to win on this front. At least get it to parity so that it's not an advantage. Okay, so what did we do? I'll go very quick. Again, I like things I can put my hands on. I know this podium is here, right? And so addresses and physical locations and people are things that you can actually verify. And there's a process I'm sure everybody's done. Everybody in this room has moved before. How many of you have submitted a national change of address with Postal Service? Yeah, it's a simple process. 40 million people do it every year. So what we did is we said, well, let's take the entire voter file, which is now 7.2 million rows of data, and let's run it through the national change of address. It does a couple of things, right? So it will tell us whether or not an individual in that file told the Postal Service, I don't want my mail here anymore. And here, by the way, is where they're registered to vote. And it'll tell us, where do you want it to be sent? So that's what we did. The other thing it does is something called CAS certification. And CAS gives you delivery point information. CAS will tell you that, hey, this address is not a residence. Maybe it's a mailboxes plus. We're going to get to that. Maybe it's a church. Maybe it's an undeliverable location or an empty lot. So this is a really good process. Now, the reason I know a little bit about this is everybody here familiar with Crystal Springs? So a big company, we had 1.2 million customers, and I managed $1 billion of revenue for that company and sent out 1.3 million invoices every 4 weeks across the nation. And we NCOA'd and CAS certified every single file, every single time. Because we wanted our mail to get to the person, right? By the way, that's something that our Secretary of State can do too. And this is something that's required by federal law. So we ran that entire file. I'm not going to go through what it is I just told you. And I only did this because I like graphics, and I just wanted to show you that I can do animation with. Basically, thank you very much. Basically, we said, okay, let's check the voting address on file with the Secretary of State's office and see what we find out of that file. And what we got was 580,000 people in our voter file that had moved. Now, not every change of address is a move, right? Maybe it's a snowbird that goes down to Florida and they just do a temporary forwarding for 6 months. So there are legitimate reasons why somebody would not actually lose their residency. Military is certainly one of them. And so here's what we did. We took that 580,000 out of that 7.6 million records, and we removed everybody that didn't vote in the general to begin with. Because we were looking at the general election. So we got rid of them. Remember, deductive funnel. Start big, go small. And by the way, don't go public with the big part of the funnel. Go public with the small part of the funnel. We removed all the military and likely dependents. What we did there is anybody who had an address that was anywhere near a military installation, we just assumed they were military. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. You can live near Fort Bragg and not be in the Army. You can live near Camp Pendleton and not be in the Marine Corps. But we just erred on the right side, which is how you do it, right? We removed all the inactive records because it was filled with inactive records. We removed anybody who voted electronically or UOCAVA because we just assumed that that's a legitimate vote. There's a reason they're voting electronically. They're most likely military. We removed anyone who submitted that change of address in a period that was greater than 18 months because I don't know where they're at that point. And we really narrowed this down and we removed anybody that had just moved within the county. So if you started in Hall County and you moved to Hall County, nothing has really changed. Your precincts has changed, but you're still in the right congressional district, you're voting for the correct sheriff, you're still registered to vote in that county. And in this state, by the way, if you move out of your county, after 30 days, you cannot vote in your own county. That is an illegal vote, okay? And here's the thing, sometimes people do it because they don't know. So not everybody is a villain trying to usurp democracy. Some people just don't know. But that's what we did, and we came up with 35,000 people across 159 counties that had moved within 18 months. They were gone more than 30 days. Their address on record for registration had been forwarded to a new address, and we presumed, for probable cause purposes, that suggested that they no longer lived where they used to be. Incidentally, there's something called the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA. It's the federal law that governs voter registration. It's a very powerful piece of legislation at the federal level, and it's enforced vigorously. That same law expressly states you can use the U.S. Postal Service's NCOA to produce probable cause for voter file maintenance, meaning you can use the information that we used to pull somebody off of a roll after what's almost a 7-year period, by the way. So you don't just pull people off the roll. And the Democrats like the word purge because they think we just yank people off the rolls, but we don't. That's not how it works. Well, that 35,000 is accurate. The president cited it in a press release. You may have seen this 35,000. That's our 35,000. So people like examples. So I want to give you an example of one of those 35,000. This nice lady named Jane. And people like pictures, but again, everybody's suing everybody, so I'm redacting everything. But you have my word, this is a real person. Jane moved from Peachtree Corners, and her real name is not Jane, but Jane moved from Peachtree Corners in May of 2016, Portland, Oregon. She took a job as a nurse with a hospital up there. She bragged about that job, and she should, because before that she was working at a J. Christopher's downtown. So it's a big step. She finished school, she got her nursing degree, she moved to Portland. She moved to her first apartment. She's on her 4th after 4 years now. She's got a wonderful boyfriend and she teaches spin class at a local gym just downtown. Her mother on social media talks about how she never sees her daughter because her daughter doesn't come home anymore. And yet somehow, 41 months, there you go, 41 months later, she requested an absentee ballot. But she didn't have to request it because somebody in the Secretary of State's office sent her a request form. And they never NCOA'd the file, so they didn't know she moved, and that form went out And September, they issued it to her, and she voted October 24th. In October, she was in Portland. She has not come back. She's not coming back. She's moved. And so we would get blasted by the left for this work, and they're like, well, you're disenfranchising this person. And of course, they keep coming after and saying, and we're uniquely disenfranchising black and brown people. And you're like, I don't know from that file if they're black and brown. I don't know if they're Republican or Democrat. I don't know if they're tall or short. I don't know anything about them other than their name and their address. But this person and 34,999 like her voted, and we should understand. And we should also probably say, now that we know this person voted, how about a criminal charge? And how about we make that public so everybody else knows, oh, by the way, we have laws, and those laws have teeth. But if we pull the teeth out of this animal, it's completely pointless. So this very happens. Well, here's the best part. Sorry. Wait. This is the best part.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume everybody here knows Gabe. And Gabe was one of the guys that has consistently said, this is not a problem. Nothing happened. We need to move forward. We did everything amazing. I'm going to wear my collar up and tell you, look away and get on with it. Except somebody voted with his house. Does anybody remember that? So after he was telling us that this is nonsense, a lady did the same thing with his private residence and voted using his address. Sometimes the universe gives you wonderful gifts. I present you with this one. All right, so I talked to you a little bit, and we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to move quick about caste certification. Like I told you, what caste will do is it will tell you things like CMRA. That's a commercial mail receiving agency. It is not legal to register to vote anywhere other than a residential address. Period. And yet, in this one store, we found 160 Georgians registered to vote. In one store, now this is going to shock you. This is probably, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to be delicate. There are issues in Fulton County. Okay? I know that's going to upset many of you. I know you're great defenders of Fulton County and the integrity of their process down there. This is in Fulton County. A lot of these people, when you get an address in there, the address is the address of the store, and then you have a box number, right? 230. So it would be like, there it is, 22870 Peachtree Road, number 230. A lot of these individuals registered apartment 230, right? So you don't do that accidentally because you're not living in a 6 by 6 by 6 square foot box, right, or inch box. This is a real problem. And this testimony, by the way, was produced during was provided during some of the Senate hearings, and the left just shot it down and said, well, you don't know that. There could be legitimate reasons. There are no legitimate reasons whatsoever. You cannot do this legally. And we found over 1,300 Georgians at dozens of these stores had registered. Republican, Democrat, I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that happened and everybody told us there was nothing going on. Well, here's a good one. 2,100 Georgians registered at this one church. Now here's the deal. The homeless deserve to vote. They have a right to vote, and we should protect that right to vote. And in this state, you can legally register if you're homeless with a church or some other facility that supports homeless people. But are you going to tell me that over 2,000 Georgians are homeless and supported in Fulton County, by the way, at this one facility that has no beds? No? It's absurd. Who's asking this question at the Secretary of State's office? How about this? The Alamo. Well, it's not the Alamo. It's a little building down in Fulton County with 1,400 people registered at that one little building. Now, that's an outreach place, but how do we know that everything there is legitimate? That's a lot, by the way, for that building. It doesn't even look like it's functional, right? How about here in Decatur? 1,000 Georgians registered to vote there. That's their jail. Now, here's the deal. If you're not convicted of a felony, you can vote. You're going to tell me all 1,000 of these individuals are civically minded, active, politically engaged individuals in jail with minor misdemeanors and they want to vote? I don't believe it. Well, exactly. Yeah, that's how many beds do they have? Yep. Yeah, and where are these Georgians? Are they still there? Are they not? This is one of my favorites. This facility is a private organization that's contracted by the Federal Bureau of Prisons as a exit re-entry for inmates. They have 165 beds, but somehow have 274 people registered there. And oh, by the way, if you're in a federal prison, there's a good chance you're not in there for shoplifting. Okay? So there's a very good chance that the only people that are actually in these units are felons. So who's registering to vote there? And how long are those registrations being carried over? And if nobody's checking it, why wouldn't you just register everybody there that you wanted to vote? Again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily proof that something happened, but it's evidence, and it's something that we need to go and we need to look closer at. All right. Well, I only put this in there because I saw this the other day, but and it's because look at the pressure we're under, and why do we have to get this right? This is a news article just the other day. Feds warn of a potential violence fueled by false election claims. There are false election claims out there. We have to be careful because it's being used against us. But what I love about our media, this is a dire warning. It's a big deal, right? Well, if you read the article, it actually said, well, they've seen an increasing but modest levels of individuals calling. And if you read further, it said, well, we need to be clear, we don't have any intelligence of a specific domestic terrorist plot. So this is all nonsense, but it's being used against us. So we have to be very careful about what we claim to be fact and what we claim and what we plan to do with it. And by the way, that's the same media that forgot this, right? What about the real riots? The $2 billion and the 25 people that died because of those. They won't say anything about that, but they will say that even the mere discussion of election fraud is evidence of a planned coup d'etat. Nonsense. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that that's the world we live in. All right, so real quick, once we found all that data, we used a wonderful piece of legislation in our state, the Section 230 challenge, as we call it. And that is the law in this state that is a reflection of your First Amendment right to petition the government with your grievance. That's your right. Nobody can take that from you. And so if Stacy is aware of somebody in Hall County, and she's a Hall County registered voter, and she's aware that somebody's moved, but she thinks they registered, she can challenge their eligibility. She's not saying that they broke the law. She's simply saying, hey, I know Bob Smith, and I think Bob Smith's registered to vote in Hall County, but Bob Smith moved to Puerto Rico 2 years ago. And it's a perfectly what I call a benign process. All it does is it tells the Board of Elections, hey, I've got probable cause to believe Bob Smith is in Puerto Rico. You need to verify that they're still in the county and still an eligible voter. And then what they'll do is they'll send a card out. There's a process for this. All of this is governed by federal law, and it's also governed by state law. And it's airtight. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's a perfect example of exactly what citizens need to do, and that is we hold each other accountable. Government's never going to be able to do it. We have to be able to do it. So we challenged, and we went to these different counties, and individuals filed challenges, and I know there was a challenge in Hall County. And it was an important thing to do, because really what that challenge was doing is just forcing the Secretary of State's office to clean up the voter rolls. But it was also highlighting people that cast votes that should not have cast votes, at least not in that county. Okay? And what came of it? Well, we got sued. We got sued.
I was one of the challenges.
Yeah, Ron Johnson, your fellow Marine, got sued with me. So remember Christmas Eve? It was snowing?
Yep.
It was wonderful. It was so beautiful outside. It was so nice. And I got a call from one of my colleagues. He says, hey, I think we just got sued. A process server just handed me a federal lawsuit. We're being sued. And about that time, I live on some acreage and my property's gated. I saw a car come up and just sit there at the end of my driveway. My gate's closed. And I called my lawyer and I said, listen, I think I'm being sued. I think there's a process server at the end of my driveway. By the way, my family and I are sitting around a fireplace, literally watching Christmas movies. I said, what do I do? He threw an expletive out there at me and said, yeah, let him sit there all night long. Go back and enjoy Christmas. And that's what we did. We let him sit out there until he left. But here's what they accused us of. And here's what they accused us of. Voter suppression and intimidation. We never confronted a person. We don't know who they are. We never did a thing. We never did that. They said that it was an effort to intimidate and deter eligible and qualified Georgians, particularly black and brown. Let me tell you something, and I'm serious about this. I fought in Africa, okay? That doesn't make me morally superior to anybody. And I was an FBI agent on the streets of St. Louis, and I took an oath to defend civil liberties in this country. And I don't care who you are. And I don't care what your political affiliation is. Right is right, wrong is wrong. When you accuse people, and in my case, someone like me, who's sworn to defend these rights, that I'm a racist, and because I'm exercising my First Amendment right that it's somehow evidence of racism, you get pretty angry about that, right? They said that we violated the Voter Rights Act. They said we violated the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Ron was there when that bill was passed.
We had no idea what color they were, what party they were voting in. We had names.
We had names.
We had names and addresses.
Names and addresses.
And
we were doing something
and we started out at each county by saying, we do not want to drop people from voters' rolls. We want them to vote in their legal place.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, we never accuse anybody of doing anything illegal.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
And Derek, one of the things, you were not letting them intimidate you. I received 2 attorneys, good friends, that called me, and I was number 1 on Stacey Abrams' list, confiscated my phone, because I continuously was texting the Secretary of State, the governor's office, different higher officials that were on this list. So I was advised, no more texting, no more emails, only phone calls.
Yeah.
So this is something that we have to understand. You have to know the whole story of what goes on.
Yeah.
So don't assume. And that's one of the best things is I'm not afraid or intimidated by attorneys. I have great attorney friends, and we have a lot that we can purge. But with this, we have to understand that we go through a different standard. People pick on us every day. And with that, that's fine. What we do, we are supposed to serve you as constituents. However, we're going to agree to disagree on certain things that we talk about. Stacey Abrams has one path. That one path, she has tons of people, nonprofit organizations
numbers
that make a fortune in nonprofit payroll.
Yep.
And these are the things you need to decide. You have to know the whole facts of everything that goes when you put your military together. And they have put a ground game that's pretty amazing, and we've allowed that to happen.
And we need to understand this. If you're going to stand on the right side of an argument, you're going to be persecuted for it.
Yes.
Just go to your faith. Just let your faith inform that process. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be called names. Go ahead.
The other thing he didn't say, the day after Christmas we got served, and the day after that we got served again. We've been served 3 times. Plus how many phone calls?
Well, it's insane. But here's the deal: you're going to be attacked. You're going to be called names. You're going to be called a racist. You're going to call me much worse because I've been called everything. I'm a Marine. But you're going to be called names, and they count on us shriveling up and moving away from that flame, and we can't do it. And here's the other thing they count on us doing: they count us on bargaining against ourselves. And here's what we've done: we do this all the time. They will come at us and they'll demand 10 yards. And we'll say, no way, we're not giving you 10 yards. And they'll come back and they'll say, fine, we'll take 8. We'll say, there's no way you're getting 8 yards from us. We're right. And they'll say, fine, we'll do 6. And we'll say, we're not doing 6. And then they'll go, we'll do 4. And we'll say, well, we'll give you 1. And they'll go 2. And we'll go, okay, we'll give you 2. And then we walk away and we go, look at that, we only gave them 2 yards and they wanted 10. But they came into the transaction with 0.
That's right.
So we've got to stop compromising with people that do not want to compromise with us. They want to take what we have. We also need to start leaning. I know we've got a couple questions. I'm going to push through this real quick. We've got to start leaning into this fight. We got to know that we're going to get hit. We got to know that that's a badge of honor. We've got to welcome that persecution. And we've got to learn from it too, because, and we're going to talk about this very, very quickly, because they have learned to weaponize the courts. We need to start suing people the way they sue us. It's a tactic of theirs, and it's working. So I'm going to go very quickly. That went to trial January 1. I'm going to be honest with you. I was sitting on the ocean watching dolphins. That's what I was doing while the trial was going. Thanks to COVID, it was online. And I'm happy to report that we prevailed. Okay. So that's good, right? We did beat that. And then here's the next piece. Yeah, for now, they'll sue us again, right? But we'll take our victories. And you know what? I didn't get hurt. Did you get hurt?
Nope.
You got any scars?
Nope.
You intact? You're eating well?
Good.
Yeah, you're eating well.
How much did it cost for your lawyers?
Well, that's a whole nother issue. We're gonna get there. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, we had the dream team. So the lead attorney in our case is a gentleman that's argued election law before the U.S. Supreme Court 14 times and has succeeded 9 of those. So I'm not entirely certain that they fully understood who they were picking a fight with, but I will tell you that we wanted them to learn that if you're gonna fight, it's going to hurt. Not only are you gonna lose, but we're gonna make you go back with a little less than you came with. So,
there you go.
but we need to keep doing it. All right, so here's some good news and we'll get wrapped up. Since we did these elections and since we suppressed all these votes, at least 10,000 people now have gone back and changed their address to where we said they moved to. That is the final adjudication for me of the work. We know we got it right because Bob Smith went back to the Secretary of State and said, oh, by the way, I moved to Puerto Rico. Now the great question is, hey, Secretary of State, because they know this list, what are you going to do? How many of these votes were Republican, how many were Democrat, and how did they affect the election? We had a presidential election decided by almost 12,000 votes. And I guarantee the number is more than 10,000 that we know were not in the proper district. What are they going to do about it? If I were a gambling man, I would go with nothing. They're not going to do anything about it. And I would remember that at the polls. And I would also remember that when we're talking to future candidates. But this is good news. It means that it wasn't junk science. Gabe was wrong. The Secretary of State, who refused to admit there was anything wrong at all up until Garland Favorito's work, and then all of a sudden we need outside agencies to investigate. Nope, we were right. All right, so let me walk you through this very fast. These are the 5 primary things that they're doing to us right now, the Democratic strategy. And this is just coming out of the experience of the last 10 months, 9 months. One is deliberately bloat the voter rolls. We talked about that. Deliberately bloat them. They do it a couple ways. The aggressive registration techniques, the registration harvesting, which we have to get our arms around, it's illegal. But also, every single time there's been an effort to clean those voter rolls, they try to sue. People forget this, but when Brian Kemp was Secretary of State, he was constantly trying to clean those voter rolls, and he was constantly fighting off federal lawsuits as a result of it. Even though the federal law requires it. It's not something you should do, it's something that you shall do. Okay? They've weaponized the courts. They harass, they intimidate, they block our attempts to clean the voter rolls, they use the courts, they'll say anything in court. We've experienced firsthand. They will come to court without evidence, without a game plan, without anything, because it doesn't matter. At that point, they've locked you up. They've diverted your resources. They've taken your attention off the battlefield. We need to do the same. We also need to do it so aggressively that they learn. We back up. I spent some time working in the soda business for Pepsi, way back when, not here, so don't get mad at me. And we fought the Coke guys. And the Coke guys would tear down one of our signs. And I'd always tell our guys, every time they tear down one of yours, take 3 of theirs. In time, they'll stop doing it. Well, every time they sue us once, we need to sue them 3 times. We need to make it costly for them. And we need to make them realize that this dog's got teeth and it will bite. And right now, I don't think they're concerned about us. The third thing they do is they publicly associate all our efforts as this wanton, systemic, organized effort to suppress the votes of black and brown people. And it's nonsense. I've had the good fortune because of how the universe has kind of placed me in Georgia to meet with a lot of counties that are way the heck out there. I've gotten to meet a lot of people in a lot of different places. And I said it earlier, I'll say it again. There is no more welcoming political party in all of Georgia and all of the United States than the Republican Party. Yeah, we've got problems and we've got to get ourselves organized, but we welcome everybody. And any idea, any of this number 3, any of this is nonsense, and we need to fight back on it. And we need to be confident in saying it too, because a lot of people don't even want to acknowledge this. They're afraid to even say racist or black and brown. We need to be able to have that conversation. Number 4, they aggressively push everybody to the absentee ballots. We're not going to stop that. So we need to figure out how to counter it. We know we have voters in our rural counties that don't vote. Obviously, turnout is always an opportunity. Why not make it easy for them? I have a lot of confidence that if you vote absentee, your vote's going to count. In fact, I'm 100% confident it will. I'm also 100% confident that if you are an ineligible voter or you want to commit fraud, that's where you do it. But we need to make people comfortable using absentee ballots, and we need to grow our ranks doing it. And finally, they dominate these boards of elections. If I learned anything from the challenges we did, I had no I had no idea the level of influence Democrats have over our boards of elections, often in Republican counties. So we need to take a very close look at the composition of these boards and make sure that there's a balance there, and that what they're doing is they're advancing the interest of our democracy, not shooting down our rightful challenges. We had challenges rejected everywhere where they democratically controlled. The other thing that we saw with these boards elections, and I know everybody saw it, Senate Bill 202 addressed it to some extent, is all the outside funding that those same boards were getting in order to advance their elections from CTA, whatever it was, the Zuckerberg organization, right? That's real. I mean, tens of millions of dollars went into counties that went Biden. It's unbelievable that that was allowed to happen. Now, fortunately, through 202, which they passed, now they can't just take those money from outside firms. Basically, if you're given enough money to buy a voter bus to drive around Fulton County, then maybe every county in the state should get a bus too, right? And by the way, we took those voter buses and we mapped every single stop that they scheduled, and then we geocoded it and located the next polling place, and we determined how many times they spent times in Biden precincts and in Trump precincts. And 70% of the time, they took that bus and parked it in a Biden precinct. It's a laser-guided missile to get the kind of votes you want to get. And it should be outlawed. Senate Bill 202 outlaws them unless they're used under an emergency declared by the governor and only the governor. So we're tightening some of these controls up, but it comes back to the Board of Elections. They do what they want to do. That Fulton County, they went and bought these buses without talking to anybody. They put all of those drop boxes were purchased with monies from those outside firms, and they just did it. So we need to get all that looped in. And I'm going to try to get us through the rest of this. It might have frozen. It did freeze. You're in luck. But we are actually at the end of this, I think. And there's my bill. And let's try this one more time. And now it can be recognized. Stacy, tell a joke. There we go. Okay. So real quick, like I said, I mean, every time we try to purge, lawsuit. I mean, we do forget that Kemp was trying to do this work and it was being land-based nationally. And everybody remembers this is how ridiculous this is. One of the challenges in Muskogee County was referred to federal court for an injunction, and the judge presiding over it was Stacey Abrams' sister. So this is what we're dealing with. And of course, she had to walk that back 24 hours later. Everything we do, large-scale reforms, right, we get sued. Senate Bill 202, we're being sued. Senate Bill 202 is a good bill. It is. I scoured that bill. There's nothing in there that I can find. And I would tell you right now, I'd say, here's something that I think disproportionately benefits one person versus the other. It's a good piece of legislation. We need to defend that piece of legislation. And then we need to ask for more, because it's just the start, right? There's cleanup opportunities for that bill. And here's what we're dealing with. I referenced this earlier. Stacey Abrams' organization, in 1 month period, they took 357,000 individual donations and 34 million. This topic is a fundraising boon, okay? And you need to remember that, not just for the Democrats, but also that people that are telling what you want to hear. Make sure that they're not out there making money off of this, because a lot of people are making money off of this, on both sides of this. We need the truth, independent of the fundraising, but this is what we're dealing with. And this is the group that sued us. So how do we fight a group that can raise $34 million in 30 days?
And Derek, again, when we were passing 202, in the changes, we had 100 lawsuits waiting for everything we did in the bill. With that being said, keep a close eye on COVID, as that was part of the strategy. It's coming back with different variances. Right. It's coming back to where they're going to continuously say we need to do the same thing because of COVID for the next election. So keep an eye on that.
And we've seen their playbook.
Yes.
And that's good. And I'll conclude with that. So bottom line, was there fraud? Yes. Of course there was fraud. But there are other factors. And if we're going to be, it's just like if you run a company, I run a company, if we're going to be a world-class organization, we need to admit that we have some faults. Right? We do. And we need to do that with confidence. We need to do it with humility. And then we need to solve for those faults. That's how we do it. We can spend all day obsessing on the faults of our opposition. That's not going to help us at all. We don't own a working time machine, and if you do, see me after this. Some things I like to do, which means that we need to be very judicious about how much time we spent on what happened back there. We are not going to win the battle ahead by trying to change what happened behind. We do have to get our heads looking forward again. The Democrats have a strategy, and I'm sorry to say, it's working. Right? It's working. So we need to embrace that idea. Nobody wants to admit that their enemy has capability, but that's a quick way to lose. You need to understand that your enemy does have capability, and while we're talking, they're talking too. Somewhere there's somebody like me talking to them the way they want to connect. I'll be the first person. Our focus has been divided, and our resources have been divided. There's been almost no discipline applied to how we're going after some of the issues that came out of this. And I'm not being critical, because obviously we got good legislation. So that's a good example of the system working. But the fact of the matter is that we have been diverted, we've been divided, and we are a very capable group of individuals. But individually, if they keep splitting us apart, if we're chasing this guy and chasing that person and believing this theory and going after that theory, at some point the enemy just walks right into your backyard, puts the barbecue down, starts cooking, and before you know it, they've moved in. So we do need to step back a little bit and say, okay, wait a minute, are we being played? Poor turnout cost election. We got to figure this one out. We got to get our neighbors out. We got to do this probably through absentee, and we've got to win, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to win. We've got to counter their playbook. We know what their playbook is. As Emery was talking about, they're going to use COVID again, but we know the COVID strategy. And the COVID strategy is push people absentee, push them to those drop boxes, and reduce any measure of basically go after any measure that would produce any accountability or transparency. So I think we can do this. I'm actually optimistic. Most people I talk to, they think we're done. No, we're not. Listen, the Democrats have a pretty good strategy. It's not that good. It's just that ours is worse. So let's just make it better. Well, listen, with that, I know there's questions, and this probably went longer than it should have. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate the dialogue. I owe you the first question, ma'am. So, yes.
Well, I just wanted to say that if you think the Democrats aren't moving along, if you take one look at Warnock's Instagram since May, you will see.
Yeah.
And that's what he wants us to see, you understand. However, it says they're active. And my biggest concern today, right here and now, is they have a strategy. What is ours that we have learned from, which you gave us a lot of facts. Now, what is our action to counteract these facts? Because when I worked for the Republican Party in 2020, I had never done this before. I was to make phone calls. I made 25 phone calls, and that was the biggest waste of time in my life, because I found out exactly what you're talking about. There's no answer, that person's moved, etc. I had 2 people I was able to talk to.
Yeah.
One yelled at me, and the other said, call me back, which when you call back.
And I'm sorry for yelling at you, but I didn't know who you were.
Well, I didn't care if she yelled at me, it was a lady, but I came here today because it's driving me crazy.
Yes.
I do not want to go backwards.
And
I
that
want to
is
go
the
forward.
energy
What is it?
that we need, and don't lose it. We do need a strategy, right? We
need
do.
it.
We absolutely need a strategy, because here's what I keep finding when I go out around the state is people want to fight. And you know what? Life presents you with only so many good fights anyway. So when it comes along, you jump in. This is a good fight, but we do need to get to a point of strategy. And I'll tell you what a strategy isn't. Well, we're just going to do different than we did last time. That's not a strategy. We need to take information, not just this information, but all of it, and sit down and go objectively. How do we counter this? What are we no good at? Because I think part of the problem with politics, to be perfectly frank, is it's easy for the humility to get sucked out of the room and admit that you have any fault. We get very, very, very insular, and we get very narrow in our minds, and we really need to be shaken up a little bit, and great leadership will do that. Great organizations are led by people that make those organizations humble and admit their faults and fix them. And you put a strategy in place that is measurable, so you know whether or not what you're trying to do is actually working, because if it doesn't, you can shift. But if you don't know where you're at, and you don't know where you're going, there's no GPS on the planet that's going to help you, because you don't have enough information. So,
but that's got to come from leadership.
Yeah, it does.
Where's the leadership?
And I can't answer that. I mean, I have opinions, but this is about facts.
So is there no state leadership that's trying to
How about county
do this?
Well, I'll tell you this. I know that there's going to be opinions in the front row on this. I do know this. And there should be. And listen, I respect the people that step up. This is not easy to do. The folks in the front row, it's not easy to do. I will tell you this. The answer is locally. This is my opinion. If you really want to make a difference, if you really want to move the needle, start with your own backyard first. Start with your county. Start with your precinct. Start with your neighborhood. Because if everybody did that, if everybody mowed their yard on Tuesday, boy, what a good-looking Wednesday we would have. And so I think the answer is we have some vacuum when it comes to leadership that we need to figure out how to fill. We get very comfortable going with known names, and it's an easy thing to do. And I'm not being critical of any names, but we're going to have to be a little disruptive if we're going to change the trajectory that we're presently on. I will tell you that implementing the same strategies 2 or 3 times again and thinking this is going to be the time that it's going to work, well, that's nonsensical. But I can't be entirely critical because I'm not sitting in the rooms. I don't know what the efforts are. But I do know about strategy. I know what it takes to run large, complex organizations across multiple functions and multiple geographies. It's not easy, but it still has to happen. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that I think the Republican Party needs to do is to stop being so personal. We had people during the Senate election, Republicans, that were attacking Kelly Loeffler. Oh, go out, vote against her, don't vote, stay home, I don't like her. You know, she was put in there because of and then it's like, okay, so that was the candidate. So, and just like you said, staying home is not an option.
Yeah.
And those people stayed home because they didn't like her or they didn't like the individual. But it's about the job.
Yep.
And not the personality.
Yeah, we didn't lose those seats, we surrendered them.
Yeah, we
did. And you know what, let's duke it out in the primaries.
Yeah.
Let's duke it out in the primaries. And then when we get to the general, listen, if you like the Democrat candidate better, then vote Democrat. Otherwise, you're exactly right. But again, I would argue that some of this comes down to leadership because we need to be aligned. We're trying so hard to always align our ideology, but the first thing we need to align is our motivation. Like our motivation should be to preserve liberty. You know, I have a personal relationship with liberty just like everybody else. And the last thing that I want to do is put a political ideology ahead of my liberty. Now, I have a political ideology that happens to support liberty, so it's pretty good. But if there's something in there that deviates from it, I'm going to call it out every single time. But we do need leadership to say, here's the motivation. Can we get a line on that? We want to win elections. That's an easy mission statement. Win elections. Good. We all want to do that. What do we need to do it? We can get there. I know we can get there. Yes, sir.
I've been coming up here for about 20 years, I guess. The Republican meeting. The most we have is 40, maybe. Unless it's some big event somewhere. Why?
Yeah.
Can't we get more people to come to meetings and learn a little bit about what happened in our government?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that's probably been the challenge since we've been a country. You know, most people don't appreciate what they have until it's taken away.
Amen.
And so, you know, it's difficult to know. We can see the wall, we can see it narrowing, right? We see ridiculous things happening with respect to law and crime. We see what's happening in our education system. The very seeds of democracy, our children are being corrupted before we can even get them out in the world. We see all of this happening. But I would suggest this, and I'd be very curious to what Stacy, Rebecca think, and Ron, and well, everybody. I see more engagement now than I've ever seen. And I think what people are saying is, but how? So I think we can shift from the whys to, okay, how? Like we know why we want to engage. People are saying, just put me in, coach, but tell me what position to play and when can I get there? I think if we put that call out and it was very clear what we need people to do, I think we'd have more people than we think.
Well, you know, when I was in the Army, I had to take an oath.
Yes, sir. We both took it.
The Constitution.
Yep.
We got leaders in Washington that don't even pay attention to it.
You remember
I know what it said.
and the enemies that we were supposed to defend it against are where? Foreign and
Domestic.
Yep. So I'm with you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Well, why can't we kick those people out?
I like that one too. Yeah, voter. By the way, I thought where you were going is that I wasn't a big enough draw to get more than what we had here today.
What would have done to BAU if we had to obey when we was in the service?
Amen. Yeah.
And they kicked us out, wasn't it?
Yeah. After we were serving food in a prison. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, one thing that wasn't brought up at all today is Dominion.
Yeah.
And,
It gets brought up in every, though I'm always ready for this one.
right, okay.
Yeah.
They are finding that there are ways to hack into that.
So let me tell you what I think, and don't be disappointed in what I tell you. But I've been in the technology business for a long time. I have a large company that works for energy and utility firms throughout North America, every state and in Canada. We deal with intrusion events, and we have cyber issues, and we do that kind of work. When there's a cyber intrusion event, it's generally not difficult to detect it and approve it. The intrusion they keep telling us happened with Dominion has not yet been proven. And I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I am telling you it has not been proven. And when it gets proven, it will be proven. But here's the thing about technology, is there's always a trail. There's always an audit trail. Here's what I would caution you. I would not, I almost pray that people will do this. Don't discount the fact that Dominion might be compromised. But please understand, it has not yet been proven. This stuff that happened, the cybersecurity symposium in Mike Lindell, this is nothing. And I hate to say this because he's a great patriot, but I think he's been conned by some experts. I've been in this business for a long, long, long time. If I picked what you've been doing for your whole life and tried to tell you how to do it, and you asked me how much experience I had, and I said none, you wouldn't like that. So I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I'm saying before you throw it out, wait for it to be proven. Now here's a question I got asked in Gordon County. They said, well, we don't have any faith in it, so should they get rid of it? And here's my answer to that. The government should do whatever it takes to restore our faith in the elections, even if it means throwing out a Dominion system that may, by the way, work perfectly. We don't know. We just don't know yet. But if that would restore the faith of the people, then they should do it. And if somebody says back to you, or an elected official, I'm not picking on Emery, he's one of my favorites, if they say, well, that would be a waste of money, I'd say, well, when has the government ever wasted money? So here's what I would encourage you to do. I would focus on the things we know, the stuff we can put our arms around. I would think about winning elections.
Well, it's not been proven because they're blocking the proof.
I don't believe that either.
You don't?
I don't. Let me tell you, it isn't hard to take an operating system, open it up, and see if somebody got in there. It's not hard. You keep hearing things about packets and IP addresses. Anybody can sit next to a library and get packets and IP addresses. That's not evidence that they took control of an operating system. It is so complex, number one. Number two is, this is from the FBI. Conspiracies are so hard to maintain. When you get 3 people involved in something, everybody knows everything. It falls apart over time. Again, I'm not saying that there isn't anecdotal information out there that suggests that something happened. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that's not where I would push all my chips in just yet. And I'd really be looking for the experts to do it. And I'd be looking for people that aren't making a single dollar doing it also. Because I will tell you, there's so much money being made by so many firms, and we're going long. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody who believes in that. What I'm saying is, don't put your chips on that stock just yet. Wait, just wait at the end of the day, because it's beyond our control anyways.
So if we do all these actions to try to get more votes through our county, through our state, etc., for the Republicans, more votes.
Yep.
We can be comfortable that it's not going to be overturned because Dominion.
I would be right now, because until somebody proves you that votes were changed. And there's some things that happened in Senate Bill 202 that's really good. So the absentee ballots are now going to be printed on security paper. Before, My kid could have printed one out on it. So there's certain things that here's where I think they got us. I think they got us through fraudulent registration. I think they got us through the own ineptness or ineptitude of our Secretary of State's office.
Yeah.
Nobody authorized those 6.9 million ballots. And the other thing that we forget was the March consent decree that made it harder to challenge a ballot. You know, so what the Secretary of State did effectively through the 6.9 million unsolicited ballot applications and the March consent decree is hand the Democrats the lottery. If those two things didn't happen, I'm not convinced that this would have happened. But then, what did we have? They permitted the use of those drop boxes. They permitted the use of buses. There was a lot of things that happened that were extraordinary, and they used, as Emery said, COVID as an excuse. If we don't ourselves project confidence in our ability to vote, the people that are looking to us for leadership aren't going to come out. So for now, I would vote, and I would vote confidently. We should wrap because it's, but I'll hang around and we can talk.
There, can I make one more comment, Stacy? I promise I'll stop. Something I hear about all the time that you need to really think about. We're gonna get rid of every incumbent. We're gonna replace every one of you. Think about if you coach a football team and you take your star quarterback, your second string quarterback that actually is doing good. You put your third string in, it's not the best choice. You replace the whole line, it's not the best choice. Start doing some homework on not assumptions, but facts of what I do, what your senators do, and if I ever missed returning an email to you, let me tell you why.
Emery, you're safe.
64.
We're gonna vote you back in.
64,000. No, and the day you do not want me to serve, I won't be there.
No. We need Emery.
64,000 emails is what I received.